Good afternoon. Thank you for your participation in this panel on PPP models in electromobility. I am Felipe Ezquerra, head to the South Cone and leader on transport sector. Our sector is responsible for 35% of global warming gases. Five large cities in the region, São Paulo, Mexico, Santiago, Lima, and Bogota, are among the worst cities in the world with regards to air quality. In this context, the massification of electric buses is fundamental to remove our carbon footprint. But there are several barriers connected to high investment cost, initial cost, compared to the traditional fleet, and the need to develop an ecosystem that makes electromobility easier in a market in which private sector is fundamental because of different agreement models. Our public transportation in most Latin American and Caribbean cities. Considering this context, the development of new models may play a very important part to attract private sector and contribute to this type of investment. To talk about it, we count on the presence of four important experts from both private and public sectors to talk about the subject. We have Fernando Saka, who is the Director of Public Transportation in Santiago, Chile. Coaquira from LATAM Development Business, and Marcelino Madrigal of the Director of Energy Division of Interdevelopment Bank, and José Gomes Mendes from a CEO of Mestre Casais Foundation. Fernando, as you mentioned, the public transportation has important challenges, especially with regards to more investment to buy, to increase their fleet. And of course, the transportation system in Santiago is a success case when you implemented new contractual models to replace your traditional fleet with a new electric fleet to improve the operator service levels. Can you explain to us in summary how this new agreement model is, what the schedule is for you to implement the electrical buses in Santiago? Greetings. It's a pleasure to be here with those who are remote and other panelists as well. I'll try to be very brief as much as possible. That's why I want to just tell you a little bit about our public transportation system in Santiago. 2007, we signed some agreements with transport operators. They would have to buy buses. They would have to build terminals to provide the service. Unfortunately, 14 years later, we saw that services were quite deteriorated. In this sense, based on quality of life of our population, we tried to develop a new model so that those operators or carriers who are not able to provide what we expect can be removed from the system, basically. And this is where we started. This is the strategy for both bus and also terminals. They are hired, they are bought or acquired directly by the state by means of our Metropolitan Transportation Department. So this is separated from the operation in all details so that there's no relation between the bus manufacturers, the operators, and of course the terminals are either leased or purchased directly. So this way we try to go around problems that we had seen for many years. So there is much smaller unit, so there is more flexibility to the state when we have to deal with those operators or carriers that do not meet the standards expected. Of course, with regards to our bidding, we improve the standard, we improve the fleet. We have 2,000 new buses with better standards, with Wi-Fi, with the AC, with proper security to the drivers. So several different improvements. And of course, we try to reduce the cost in our transportation system in the city of Santiago. We saw that what we were bidding was very attractive to the market. There was a very good competition, and the result in the end was that for the next year, we are going to add up 1,000 buses in Santiago. The fleet will reach 10,000 electric buses. We have 780 at this point in time, and then the coming year to the last quarter, between October and December, there will be this transitional period. So there will be 10,000 new buses, electric buses, to our system. Very interesting, Fernando. Nhiura. So I understand that ENEL X or ENEL X is very important in this process because you are investing in those the purchases of electric buses. What are the major challenges for this new type of contract or new type of agreement for the attraction of new investors? Well, we have identified several opportunities and of course hindrances as well. Opportunities, the agreement. Of course, it is a barrier, but it is important to establish a term for an electric fleet. Of course, batteries may last 8 years, but when you have electricity, it can be much more than that. In Chile, we are thinking about 14 years. Colombia, 15 years. So we see there is a big gap. For us, it's a good chance to develop this type of style with regards to term. This is the first aspect. Second, the guarantee to provide the services. So how to guarantee the continuity of the services. In the case of Chile, for example, we have, if the carrier does not meet any of the responsibilities or obligations, and the services, if they are not able to improve their quality in the service, we can change the carrier, we can change the operator. This is very important. So how much they can provide. So if it is not enough, we can just simply change them. Another important thing, terminals. As Fernando mentioned, with this new model in Chile, the responsibility is on us. So we have to look for the space, for the terminal, and we can make investments in that new infrastructure. This is very important. We know that in the case of Colombia, to renew their fleet and new buses and etc., they don't consider the terminals. Now, that is in the hands of the private sector, but that is a risk, and that could impact their PPP model in the future. So it is very important to establish who is in charge of the terminal and the infrastructure and also maintenance. Another important thing is payment, the style of payment. With this new model, we have more clarity in the payment structure. We can decrease risks. The passenger, we have the real cost of the operation, the real cost of the vehicles. That can be in tune with and done in tune with the carrier, with the operator. So you have to consider all the barrier aspects and also all the opportunities to establish each of the aspects and deal with all the details. Thank you very much, Nhiura. Thanks, Nhiura. Now, Jose, with regards to decarbonization of the public transportation by means of electric fleet or non-contaminating fleet, this is actually a global trend and a need. Different countries, different solutions to give support to this changing process. Can you explain to us, in sum, what the experience and solutions adopted in Portugal, please?
Thank you, Felipe. I'd like to greet all of the panelists here, and I would also like to thank you for the invitation to be here today. The topic of carbon neutrality and decarbonization in Portugal is considered very serious and critical to the point where we have a climate law. It indicates our ambition to have complete decarbonization by 2050. It's not only an ambition or a desire, it is mandatory and established by law. Our objective is to have a reduction of 55% by 2030 of all of the emissions of greenhouse effect gases. We have different stakeholders participating, and by 2030, Portugal will have a decrease of 40% of its greenhouse gas emissions, even though we have sectors that are decarbonizing. We have aviation and also urban transport, including different technologies. One of them have to do with the electric buses. So what have we done in Portugal in the last few years? In 2017, we launched a project called Clean Bus. It is aimed at replacing all buses for electrical buses. To implement it, we're going to have direct support to the transport operators. And why should they be direct? Because the cost of decarbonization should not have an impact on the final fees paid by our citizens. Therefore, we have a transfer of the market in terms of competition. So if you want to have an investment to purchase electric buses, then the additional investment cost will not place that operator at a disadvantaged position when compared to other operators. The difference in the cost of a diesel bus and electric bus is covered by Portugal up to a limit of 85%. That way, a small country like Portugal, we only have 10 million inhabitants, it was possible to have a transition and support about 700 buses in the last 3 years. And now we have new competitions for the replacement of other buses. And therefore, our strategy is direct. So much so that competitors will not be at disadvantage if they want to buy electric buses. We're going to conclude a study to calculate the cost of decarbonization of urban transport in Portugal. We have about 5,600 buses. About 90% of them are run by diesel, 8% natural gas, and only 2% are electric vehicles. Taking into account criteria where we're going to replace vehicles that are ran by fossil fuels. will be able to decarbonize urban transportation in Portugal within a 14-year period. And we will have to invest about $2 million. This is the cost of decarbonization, and that is the difference between the cost of naturally replacing our flights for fossil fuel vehicles, replacing them by electric vehicles. And we're talking only about the difference, and we think that within 14 years it will be possible to have that it will be possible to save 1.35 mega, and we would not have any greenhouse gases emission in Portugal after 2030. And so this is the initiative. Will have an investment of 120 million euro per year to support the replacement of these flights. Thank you very much. Very well.
Thank you very much, Jose. Marcelino, now your bid development into development bank. You are this as one of the strategies, the decarbonization and electrification of the network. So can you explain to us what the standing point is when it comes to the support to those countries in the region, when it comes to development? Yes, of course. Greetings to all participants and also to my panelists. As you mentioned, the new frontier of decarbonization in Latin America is transportation sector. According to our vision, we want to have a presence and make headway in improving the sector. As you know, Latin America has a lot of chances with the renewal of fleets, principally with the electrification, not only because of the carbon issue, but also the potential to create value chain and renewal of this value chain and creation of new infrastructures for the electric modality. We operate in three different models. Our colleagues mentioned how fundamental the government is when we have to establish this new paradigm of the electric mobility. Okay, so our first thing we have to do is to give support to the government, to give support to those policies that establish the importance of this new technology when it comes to the decarbonization in our transport sector. So we have to provide support to those countries, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, and also Chile, provide technical elements for their strategies. Second is where we operate. We are a development bank, so we have to establish the regulatory framework for both climate change, transport, energy. So all factors have to be in good combination. And us from the bank, we operate to give them support for example, the charging, the batteries of the buses, and also to establish the tariffs and the concessions. And of course, those are designed for the conventional buses. You have to adjust prices to regulate transportation in cities like Chile, the ones in Chile. So we have to consider also the environment so that these electric technologies can be at the same level as to the traditional models, and all things have to be clear so that we have the same comparison point. 14 cities being developed with the new business models, with the new buses, and this is in Guatemala, Buenos Aires, Cali, Santiago, Santo Domingo, so several cities. It is important that this business model is clear so that the operators trust the technology, understand how to operate an electric bus. This is very important to the carriers, to the companies. They have to understand how this new technology is important to our societies, to analyze from the operation point of view. This is a mature technology. It is different, of course. And then provide them with knowledge is very important. We have worked in that sense in the bank. So we have more than 51 activities to provide support to those countries for them to develop this framework. And of course, financing. This is, of course, something to consider. We are a development bank. Of course, we've been able to finance programs that are extremely innovative with, for example, changing the fleet in Costa Rica. We financed that. And also charging a network. Costa Rica is a small country. Of course, you can go from one corner to the next of the country with several changing or charging points. In Barbados, we also financing electric buses and also charging stations by means of this capital market issues, the assets. So in Peru, we also invested, or we also provided possibilities to this kind of sector. There are other instruments such as possibility of loans if they want to develop some transportation sector, when they implement that type of policy to implement this type of transportation. This is within our framework and in this in the decarbonization sector. So we are providing political support, but also financing support. Thank you very much, Marcelino. A very brief comment from my side. We, of course, base it on our bid private sector arm. We are providing finances to private operators in those replacement processes. Fernando, getting back to Santiago's case study. We have spoken a little bit before about the risks of those processes. How do you manage, how do you mitigate risk in your model in Santiago to get the help from the private sector? One of the risks in our public transportations is the demand. How do you analyze, how do you mitigate the demand? There is a risk. How can you bring in more capital to this process? Well, as a matter of fact, the model here has two agreements. They are totally separated. You can be directly hired by the Ministry of Transportation. It is almost like a country risk, isn't it? Let us look at it this way. So you, with this agreement, as Nhiura said, you are just giving them this regardless of the operator, they have to provide either a good service or bad service. The contract is still on. So, of course, there are responsibilities from the administrator. Now, of course, we have the maintenance aspect of it. So what we have to do is to certify that maintenance is properly done. But now, let us hit your question with regards to demand. I think that for the public transportation after this pandemic, there was a lot of drop in the demand. And of course, for us to dimension approximately 4.5 million of people who use the public transportation in the city of Santiago before pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, it's about there was a drop of 5%. So we're talking about 300,000 people a month. So much less. It's 5% of what we had before. In that sense, due to those variations, and of course, all the restrictions, the mandatory mask and trying to be at home, and of course at the same time we have to provide as many buses as possible in the city, but then we are actually recovering. We recovered 60% of this, the use. We estimate that we are hitting 100% in the next 2 years. But to mitigate the risks and to provide some sustainability to our transport operation, we have new agreements. these agreements are more operated or more inclined to payment based on the operation. Of course, there is the component of social demand, but the payment is more like payment per operation to the service provided to the population. So I don't think that there is any place in the world then where you provide public transportation without considering the population, and this population needs the service. And of course, these are the ways we try to mitigate the problems. Of course, it's a long way to go to hit 100% of the demand, yes, when there is the need of several campaigns. And of course, we want to attract more interest from the private sector to try to get this bad negative image from us. There is no study that really can explain the contrasts that we have in the public transportation in the world. Thank you very much, Fernando. Nhiura. We spoke about Santiago, right? But now, not only Santiago, what is the strategy of ENEL X with regards to the replacement of conventional to electric buses in the Latin America and Caribbean? Well, we want actually to make the most of the energy. How? Through electrification of the fleet, and so the M2M value is a modular strategy. First, we have the service and the charging station, and of course there are several modules. What are the modules considered in this proposal? So the fleet has to be efficient. Bus and what partners are going to be in this ecosystem. There are several alliances with the manufacturers. There is their charging stations and the concession. And of course, that is also linked to the operation. And then energy efficiency by means of smart charging, which is a platform that would provide better savings. And also a green energy, which would be the use of solar panels and others. So what we're talking here is about digitalization. We're trying to improve our fleet value with good management, with e-ticket for the buses, by using payment platforms, electric payment platforms, so to become more competitive, not only focus on financing the fleet, but also to provide an integrated full solution to add value. We also try to create an electromobility system, so we work with the public sector and private sector. When we talk about private sector, we refer to private operators, but also we consider, as we said before, different manufacturers, the buses, and other companies that are directly related, and also other participants. For example, Colombia and Brazil, we're talking about the national integration. So we are considering here a component that is adding value. For example, implementing and creating more job places in these countries. So these are regional strategies. 3,000 buses in Latin America. We'll have 2,400. And we're going to add 991 with the last bidding that we ran. And this is basically my message. Thank you very much, Nhiura. Jose, the development of your electric fleet, as we mentioned before, goes much beyond the public transportation, doesn't it? And that also requires the development of a whole ecosystem. Portugal has put out to place a very specific model to integrate charging terminals with different providers. Can you explain to us how that model goes, and what have you given as detail to motility in the country?
É verdade. It's true. That story started in 2010 in Portugal. The top mass sold vehicle was a Nissan Leaf, and the global launch was in Portugal and Israel in 2010. So Portugal realized that was a great opportunity to electrify its fleet. The energy grid in Portugal is 60% from renewable sources. I know that the figures in South America are higher, but for European standards, 60% electric power coming from renewable energies is very high for European standards. So we can electrify our fleet and to have electric mobility. And there was a critical factor, which were the charging stations. You know, it's a chicken and egg problem. To start with, people said they weren't going to buy electric vehicles because there was nowhere to charge them. And now the charging station providers wouldn't install many stations because they said there weren't enough cars to use them. So it's a chicken and egg situation. It's a market gap. And those are the situations in which the state should intervene. The government installed a public charging station network with 1,200 charging stations. That was in 2010 and 2020. And the model followed some principles that were quite important. The first was that they should include different operators in the charging station, not just one, not a public one, not a private one, different ones, and a mix of both. The second was that there should be different sources for electric power, for electric mobility. Now we have Mobiet in Portugal, which does the settling at the end of the month among the different operators in the charging stations that charge a fee. We also have the electric power sellers, so that system settles the accounts between those two players. The advantage of this model is that you don't need to have different charging cards for different brands, for different stations. With one single card, you can charge your car anywhere in the country, and you can choose which station, which provider, which operator. This worked really well in Portugal. In Spain or Germany, for instance, electric vehicle suppliers and users had to have more than 10 charging cards, depending on which station they were going to use to charge their car. So that works really well in Portugal. So what's been the result? Portugal is ranks fourth in number of charging stations per square kilometer in Europe. This is all private investment, and the charging stations are part of the model. Electric car sales in Portugal are very high. 100% electric cars in Portugal account for 18% of all car sales. If you add hybrid cars, we're talking about 30% of sales in Portugal alone. It's one of the highest figures in the world. In November, the sale of electric cars was higher than diesel-fueled cars. So that's the reality.
people only buy electric cars, whether it be in Portugal, Chile, Brazil, if they believe that there will be a charging network that works and that is simple. Meaning, you don't necessarily have to go to station A or B or C and to have different cards for each station. You can charge anywhere. The key to the success of this strategy, which at first people didn't understand, that happens. The proof is that Portugal, with the exception of Norway and Holland, because those are very specific cases, in terms of electric vehicle sales, Portugal is a leader in Europe. So we believe that model can be replicated and exported because it is a successful model. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Marcelino, I have a last question to you. Please answer it in 2 minutes so that we can meet our deadline here today. Getting back to ecosystem and electromobility, this goes beyond public transportation, of course, electric buses with batteries. Can you tell us a little about how the Inter-American Bank tries to provide supply and help that goes beyond this frontier of public transportation, beyond the electric fleet? Thank you very much, Felipe. Let me get back to what Jose said. The charging station infrastructure is extremely important. This is integral, comprehensive part and integral part for us to provide motility, and this charging terminal infrastructure is important so that we can go beyond the scope of buses. Of course, we have to consider the fiscal status of our region. It is very important to count on the public and private association. So we have to consider what the regulators are doing, because this public-private charging stations could be simple, but at the same time complex. The whole 90% of those vehicles are either charged at home or at work. So at home, very easy. They can use you at home can use your own network. But then in Latin America, when distribution of electricity is highly regulated, how can we attract public and private investment? What activities? What do you need to charge a vehicle? So Colombia, Mexico, Chile, other countries are actually not defying this sale of electricity. So once you move away from that regulation, things will flow better. And it is important to define that. So, and these definitions have not been made in several countries. We saw as what happened in Ecuador and Dominican Republic, Panama. So last year they made moves and they are making advances. The charging station infrastructure has been fast so that they can create support from the public sector to the private sector. So it is important to have projects that to build new charging stations, and of course that will be recovered. The cost the investment will recover, and of course combine that even with gas stations as they do in Spain, so that we can have a good network. So it is a lot of fuel for a good association between public and private sectors. So having charging stations is fundamental for providing the best support and make investments an easy field. We saw that there's a great chance of opportunity in Latin America to also have electric ferry boats. There is a study, and we understand that out of 130 ferry routes, 38 could be electrified in a short term. So anyhow, so there are several things that could be developed, and we are working on that in Brazil, in Florianopolis also. There are many opportunities in the region for changing the modality of public transportation. We are providing support in several countries to make headway and break barriers and advance in new frontiers and invest in those sectors as with electric ferry boats and this installed capacity of shipyards that could contribute to the value chain in the region and add also value to the electric mobility. Anyhow, I would like to say many thanks, Felipe, and all the panelists. Well, there are three messages from what we all said. First, the development on new ecosystems and especially a bus fleet. Well, of course, this is something that it is not one sole solution. There are different countries, different cities. They have to try to create their own solutions to adapt to their own needs. Second, yes, one thing is sure. It requires a very strong collaboration between private and public sector to be able to leverage and attract a private sector with a good financing capacity. And third, as being mentioned here quite a lot, sharing experiences, know what your neighbor is doing, what other countries are finding as solutions. This is fundamental in this process to create a combined solution that is needed in each location. From my side, I would like to thank you all for Nhiura, Fernando, Marcelino, José. It's been a pleasure, and it is excellent opportunity to be here with you and learn so much from your experience. And many thanks to all who followed us for the opportunity. Many thanks, and have a good evening. Thank you so much to you all. Thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye.